Good morning, everyone. My name is Murali, and I am a minister serving from the Seattle Center. And I want to say how I'm so delighted to share this time with all of you. Thank you, Surendra, for giving me this opportunity. I must say I'm a teeny bit disappointed that I won't be able to spend time physically with all of you, but Divine Mother had different plans. And also a special hello to my friends in Portland, Vajra and Cindy, Joanne, Stephanie, Shubhatani, Jackie, Bimal, and my dear friend David E.B. Special hello to all of you. Again, I wish I could be saying this hello physically, but next time, soon. Today's topic, how devotees rise. Before I delve into that, I want to first recap a little bit last week's topic, which, if you remember, was why do devotees fall? And these two kind of go hand in hand, and I want to recap that, and then they come to this one. Swamiji, in the reading, quotes two verses from the Bhagavad Gita, which give the trajectory, the steps in the fall of a devotee. And I want to recite that for you in Sanskrit, because there is a certain mantric quality to Sanskrit which appeals to the heart. It speaks directly to the heart, bypassing the intellect. So the two verses that Swamiji quotes are from chapter 2, verses 62 and 63. And they go something like this. Dhyayato vishayan pumsah sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamah kamat krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammohah sammohat smriti vibhramaha smriti bhramshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. Isn't that beautiful? It starts, Krishna gives 7 steps in the fall of a devotee. It starts with Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha. Vishaya means objects of creation, sense objects, but anything that's external. Dhyayato means dwelling on. Dhyaya, it comes from the same root as dhyana, which most of you know is very deep concentration. So dhyayato is a deep continuous dwelling on Vishaya, sense objects. Then what happens? When we do that, Sangasteshu upajayate. Upajayate means rising, and Sangha means attachment. Satsanga. Satsanga is good attachment to like-minded people. And Sangha just means attachment. So the heartstrings which were blissfully directed inward, a few of them begin to rise up and go out, kind of explode a little bit. But then, so far you're okay. Every now and then you think of an object of attachment and maybe have a little bit of pleasant feeling. And no downfall has happened yet. That's still a while away. Then, sangat sanjayate kamaha. From these little heartstrings of outward attachment, sanjayate grows kamaha, lust. Meaning the attachment now has become greater in the sense we begin to define our happiness with whether we have it or not, that car or that house or that person, or even a self-definition of who we ought to be or how we ought to look. All of those, when it turns into kamaha, lust, then it becomes a little stronger. It's a little bit harder to withdraw it back at this point. Then what happens? Kamat krodho bhijayate. Abhijayate means springs. Krodha is anger. So when something is not fulfilled, our definition of what life ought to be, it doesn't necessarily have to do with a person. It is much wider than that. When that doesn't happen, anger springs like a fountain. Abhijayate krodha. So until now it's a little more passive, but when it comes to anger, it becomes overwhelming. Now it's much harder. All of you, we all have this experience of when that anger springs, it takes a really strong mind to be able to control, and frequently we are unable to. Then what happens? Krodhat bhavati sammohaha. So krodha is anger, bhavati creates, anger creates sammohaha, infatuation. In other words, we don't like to be angry. It's a negative emotion. So we become infatuated. Something that began as casual attachment has now progressed. Now I want to pause there for a moment. I'm sure you've all been infatuated with somebody or something, maybe a person or a lifestyle, anything. I certainly have many times, in fact, I'm sorry to say. And infatuation is something different from attachment or even lust, because if you remember the person that you are infatuated with, then everything that person does seems endearing, doesn't it? Very soon it can become irritating, but at the time of infatuation, it's endearing. You love everything that that person does, isn't it? See, that's distortion of reality. Until now it wasn't. Even through anger, the reality was perceived very clearly. But infatuation, the veil of Maya is beginning to thicken. Krodhat bhavati sammohaha. Then what happens? Sammohat smriti vibhramaha. So from this infatuation, this is the big step. Smriti is memory, vibhrama is hallucination, I guess is the best way to translate it. In other words, our memory of what reality ought to be, of who we are, is now different. Swamiji translates this wonderfully as forgetfulness of our divine nature. Now the devotee has fallen because smriti bhramshat buddhi nasho buddhi nashat pranashyati. So with this loss of our true divine nature, we lose buddhi nasha, the intellect, the wisdom is destroyed, and then the devotee has fallen. It's a beautiful tracing through these 7 steps of why devotees fall. How devotees rise? Well, logically, if these are the 7 steps, it makes sense to go right to the beginning and then say, I will cleanse my heart of attachment, of anger. Then can a devotee rise? The heart cleansed of attachment and anger? You bet they can. Of course they can. It's the very definition of coming closer to God. And it's a wonderful practice too. It is great to be aware of our attachments and try our best to not be defined by them, or anger or pride. We have to try our best to not be defined by those, and in that way try to overcome it. But if that's your sole strategy on the spiritual path, then I'm sure you'll agree with me if I say that we have some failures to look forward to. They're too deep-rooted to yield to a direct assault. Swamiji writes, perhaps in an effort to awaken in us the difficulty of this kind of frontal assault, he says in one of his books, I forget which one, Awaken to Superconscious maybe, that once he decided that he needs to be more humble. And then he writes that over a few months I made a lot of progress in being more and more humble. Until one day I woke up and realized that I was proud of my humility. And this is the nature of these things, is they're too deep-rooted, and we can work with them, but they'll find a way to come back. So then what? Are we doomed? Is the spiritual path really that grim and that hard? Well, thankfully. I mean, you know the way I'm asking the question, the answer is not yes. That would be a sad talk indeed if we ended at this point. No, of course not. You see, the outlet that God has created us is so beautiful. As much as the ego likes to create these self-definitions and veils of infatuation and perceive the world through the lens of those infatuations, God has strewn through our daily life, thrown them. It's there, reminders of His presence everywhere. And you might think I'm kind of, saying something that may not be that meaningful, but let me walk you through it. Nature is one such example. One of the things, whenever I come to Portland, what I love is driving on Highway 84, coming westward towards Portland, and there is a place, if you go far enough east, there's a place as you drive west that you turn around a bend and you see Mount Hood right there in front of you. And if it's a clear winter day and you have Columbia River on one side and then Mount Hood in the far horizon, the heart just stops. It kind of retreats from its attachments and infatuations, and for a moment feels that ineffable peace. Similarly with great music, you're sitting there, begin to listen to music, and after a little bit you get absorbed in it, and then the heart just retreats from its outward engagements, and then for a moment feels that transcendental joy. Now the ego, mind you, creates a narrative for this which is very, very limiting. We often say, I enjoy nature. But the real narrative is God reminded us of Himself through nature, and that reminder is what I enjoyed. Meaning, nature reminded me of my true nature. The ego rendering of it is, I enjoy nature. You see how pervasive this is. Similarly, music. I enjoy music. Well, no. The harmony of music, the beauty of it, harmonized our hearts with God and reminded us ever so briefly of His distant presence. And these are there, now you agree with me, these are there every day. The smile of a baby. If you walk through the silent halls of a medieval cathedral, the sanctum sanctorum of an ancient temple, reminder of God's presence, our own divine nature is always present in all of these. These experiences, if we let them, are going to jog our memory. Sammohat smriti vibhramaha, forgetfulness of divine nature. That's the last stage of the fall of the devotee. These reminders are there. When we are in that stage, they are there all over the place. And some of these, for example, this is why we go on pilgrimages. They can be very transformative, however temporarily, but they can be transformative. I remember about 20 years ago, I had been to a place called Haridwar. It's in India. It's in the foothills of the Himalayas, and the Ganges River, or the Ganga River as it's known in India. The Ganga River, she's just descended down from about 11,000 feet, so she's a very fast-flowing river at this stage. But here she enters the plains, so she's very wide, about a quarter of a mile wide, and the sound that the river makes is just extraordinary, hard to describe. It's this fast-flowing quarter-mile river, and silently flowing. And in this place, in a specific spot, every evening, for millennia, uninterruptedly, they've been doing an arati, a festival of light. And quite without any planning, when I visited there, we happened to be there on a very holy day of the year. It was the first full moon of the spring according to lunar calendar, Buddha's birthday, by the way. That's when it's celebrated. And we just happened to be there. And so for the arati, it was very crowded. About 25,000 people showed up. I mean, this is India. It doesn't take much to get thousands of people. And so we were kind of been at the half immersed in the river at the ghats, holding onto a chain, staying there for about 2 hours. So because we wanted to catch the arati right there when it happened. And then the arati happens at dusk, and as the time neared, you could feel in the crowd there was some fights broke out. There was a lot of anger, irritation, jostling. you could feel the deep restlessness of the crowd. And then at around just before 6:30 or so, they began playing this wonderful chant. And still people now, this jostling and irritation reached a crescendo at this point, because we all knew it was going to begin. And then the 5 priests, and they came out with these huge lamps, really about this big, spread out like this, like a menorah, except instead of candles, there are huge flames on each one of those lamps. And it gets so hot that they had to wrap thick cloth, wet cloth around the priest's hands and arms so that they don't get burnt, and water was being poured constantly. And imagine, if you will, on the banks of the river, swift flowing, quarter-mile wide, 25,000 people. 5 priests come up on a raised platform with these big arati lamps, and then the chanting reaches a new, whatever metrical thing that it was. It's so holy. And then they begin this. The crowd goes silent in an instant. 25,000 people across on the far side of the bank, on a bridge on that side. There's a clock tower everywhere you see. It's a sea of humanity. They go silent, not by an effort of will, because you could feel the silence. It's silence descended over the crowd. The crowd didn't become silent. And you see the difference. And it wasn't that people temporarily resolved to stop jostling and fighting, but it was that there was no more need to do that. We could all feel it in our hearts. We just became silent. And the next however many minutes, I don't even remember, it was so beautiful. And then when it ended, conversations and jostling didn't start. We just dispersed quietly. I mean, there were a few whispered conversations. But I remember during the height of the arati, looking into some other person's eyes, I don't even remember, man or woman, and we both had tears in our eyes. And then, where I'm going with this is, later on that night, I had to get out of my hotel room and walk along the banks of the Ganga River, because I wanted to commune with it. Whatever it was drawing me back. And then it stayed with me for a few days. And then it went. I resumed my normal activities of infatuation and anger and attachment and so on. But I remembered it. At the time, my thing was, wow, I love the arati. Of course not. It was the magnetism, the ritual, and the holy spot and the holy day, everything made God just a little bit closer. That was the common denominator. So the problem is they don't stick. It's as if God is there and then God says, you know, this experience, that's the real thing. Come back to me when you're ready, and I'll show you more. As it says in the Festival of Light, by proud indifference unaffected, though eternally rejected, you remain our friend. So we have to go back. That's where we start. How devotees rise. Smriti vibhramaha, forgetfulness of our divine nature. God has strewn reminders of himself, and we need to latch on to that. Make that more real, not let go. So how do we do that? There are 3 things that we can do, and I'll name them, and then I'll go into them a little bit more. Train, meditate, acknowledge. Train, meditate, acknowledge. Now, what do I mean by that? You see, this little acts of God remembrance is something that the mind can be trained to do. But infatuation and where we are karmically and all the other things keep us reverting back into forgetfulness, but the mind can be trained. And it might seem a little artificial in the beginning. There was once, I'm from Bangalore in India, and there was once I was taking a taxi, a cab, back to my mother's house, and I noticed the driver every now and then, quite often actually, he would just do this. It may be look and do this, and then, And it didn't feel like a nervous twitch or a restless thing. It wasn't coming out of that restless part. It just felt that it had more stillness to it. And after a while when we talked and I felt comfortable asking him, I asked him, what are you doing? And he said that I made a habit a long time ago that as I'm driving, whenever I pass by a temple or I see a temple distantly, I just, this is a way of, it's a silent worship. I just do this. And I do this hundreds of times during the day. What a marvelous thing. And it influenced me so deeply that since I have started doing it too. And I do it here too. You go many, many places of worship. And just that little inner attunement. When you're standing in a checkout line, or I guess these days when you're sitting in a drive-through line, just every now and then tune back in. Swamiji gives us another method that when you, just before going to sleep at night, mentally review your day and offer everything that happened, whether it was a good outcome, bad outcome, you were embarrassed by yourself, you're proud of what you did, whatever that was, offer it to this inner fire of purification. This too is you, Lord. I offer this back to thee. And this yajna, the last thought is an affirmation. The last thought before falling asleep is an affirmation of our divine nature. It's a wonderful way to make the miasma of infatuation and the forgetfulness that it creates, to make it a little softer and allow God through. A third one you can do when you get up in the morning. Many of us have a photo of a master, Paramahansa Yogananda, whose teachings we follow here, or a form of divine that appeals to us. You get up in the morning, say, hello, Master. Good morning, Master. Good morning, God. It's a beautiful poem that Master wrote called God, God, God. And one of the verses in there says, thou art the food. When I break the fast of nightly separation from thee, I will taste thee mentally and say, God, God, God. So something like that. And these little rituals of God remembrance that we create for ourselves, they're very simple to do. And over time, it doesn't take too long, even a month. Initially, it's a little bit artificial, but just give it a month. It becomes very powerful. And then it can come, it can give a sense of deep peace in times of difficulty or anxiety or things like that. So that is train. Remember, I said train, meditate, acknowledge. Then meditation. This is the path that Yogananda brought to the West, and this is the path that many of us that are disciples are on. Meditation, it's a set of scientific techniques, if you will, that will still the mind and get us away from the outward pull of infatuations, and therefore allow smriti, the memory of God, to come back in. And that's meditation. Stay in the silence of meditation. It's also important, if you can, to meditate, say, first thing in the morning and last thing before you go to bed. The reason should be obvious now, that we take, it gives us enough centeredness throughout the day to make our acts of God remembrance more powerful. And it shifts that God remembrance into the subconscious during nighttime, so that we are even closer when we get up in the morning. So twice a day meditations, even 3 times, 4 times, Swamiji writes in the Path in his autobiography that he meditated 4 times a day. There are many Catholic traditions, monasteries, where prayers are conducted 4 or even 6 times a day, and they're all very meaningful when seen from this light. Sammohat smriti vibhramaha. Infatuation leads to forgetfulness. In that particular framework, that's where all of these fit in. Train, meditate. The third one, it's important and it's frequently missed. It's acknowledge. And what I mean by that is, Swamiji tells, it's a kind of a funny story. And these two people, they went duck hunting. I've never been duck hunting. I assume you do it on a body of water, on a lake or something, and because it's hunting, you carry a gun with you, and I guess you need a dog, duck hunting. So these two guys go with their dog, and this one man shoots a duck, and then the dog jumps out of the boat, and instead of swimming, it walks on water and fetches the duck back. And this man was thinking, and the way Swamiji writes, it's in Art and Science of Raja Yoga, Swami says, the man looked at his beer and thought maybe it was enriched or something. And then he shoots another duck, and the dog again walks on water and refetches the duck. And the third time, the man can't take it anymore. He looks at his friend and says, but did you see that? The man says, yeah, the stupid thing doesn't know how to swim. You see, if we insist on framing deep experiences in the language of mediocre logic, then we miss miracles. We miss God's presence. So when you have that experience in meditation, when you perhaps intuitively know that something's about to happen, and or any of the 100 different ways where we know that we are working beyond the realm of the five senses, drop everything, even for a moment, and acknowledge it, be with it, and know that a great act of grace has just happened to you. And this is very important. If a cherished guest comes into the house, do we not spend time talking to them? Do we just turn away and watch TV or sit on the phone? Well, maybe we do, but the point is, we shouldn't. So that's what I mean. Train, meditate, and acknowledge. Again, in this poem, God, 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 Master sums it up. He says, no matter where I go, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning on thee, and in the battle din of activity, my silent war cry will be God, God, God. So let me finish now with this reading from Whispers from Eternity. It's a beautiful reading. This is the book of prayer demands written by Paramahansa Yogananda. Bless me that I may perceive thee through the windows of all joyous activities. Look upon me and cheer me always as I engage in my daily duties. Let my every action, whether walking, sleeping, or dreaming, be sprayed by the fountain of thy presence. Thank you all.